Let me introduce you to a woman. This is Candace, my new wife. From today, she will be living with me. You just need to sign the divorce papers and get out. What? What are you talking about, Paul? I don't understand what you mean by divorce and telling me to get out. Let me be clear, it's your fault. You can't have children even though you're a woman. I don't need a woman who can't have children. Just sign the papers quickly. One day suddenly, my husband Paul brought home his mistress, Candace. He declared that he would live with her and divorce me. Next to him, Candace wore a smug smile. Paul also had an air of triumph, but I calmly informed him. Well, I've already moved to a new place. I divorced you a month ago. Huh? What is that? It's pointless to lie about it now. I understand you're upset, but it's useless. It's funny how you say that, ma'am. You can't just decide to divorce on your own, can you? I'm carrying Paul's child. You're completely defeated. It's unsightly, so pack your things quickly. Despite being looked down on by my husband and Candace, I was only stating the facts. I knew everything. That's why I had been preparing for retaliation until today. No matter how much they apologize, I will never forgive them. I will make them realize how foolish they are. Right after I smirked slyly, my mother-in-law appeared from another room. Seeing me, she began to smirk as well, just like Paul and Candace. Janet, you're still here? You've heard from Paul, haven't you? Please divorce him quickly. I don't want you to cause him any more pain. Mom, listen. Janet says she divorced me a month ago. That's impossible. Really, Janet, you're such a bad wife. You're infertile and now you've gone mad? You can't submit a divorce application without his signature. Indeed, like mother, like son. Their contemptuous looks were identical. Genetics are indeed frightening. I sighed heavily and then slowly began to speak. You're right, mother. I can't submit it without his signature. But if I have Paul's signed divorce application, then a divorce is possible. Do you understand now? I submitted the divorce application with his signature. What are you talking about? When did he sign the divorce papers? Stop talking nonsense. There's no nonsense. He definitely signed it in front of me. He just doesn't remember. At that point, my husband seemed to realize something and spoke up. Janet, did you make me sign while I was sleeping? If so, that's despicable. Making me sign the divorce papers without my knowledge, what were you thinking? I see, there was that option. Well done, Paul. Yeah. You seem to be really clever and cunning. But unfortunately, that's not what happened. As I said, you signed it in front of me. You always threatened divorce whenever I slightly disagreed with you. You brought out the already filled out divorce papers when you were drunk. I just submitted them to the lawyer. You really don't remember, do you? Paul, I didn't hear anything about this. Do you really not remember? I wouldn't do such a thing. I'd like to say, but honestly, I don't remember. Anyway, I submitted it a month ago, so the divorce is finalized. I've also moved to a new place, so I'll be leaving soon. As I spoke in a matter-of-fact tone, my husband appeared frustrated. But when Candace placed her hand on his shoulder and smiled, he puffed up his chest as if triumphant. When I think about it, there's no problem. It has just saved me the trouble of going to the lawyer. Now I'm officially single. All that's left is to remarry Candace and start a new life. How does that feel, Janet? Frustrating, right? You did a good thing for a useless woman who can't have children. Will you pack your things and leave next? I always thought you were not a match. Paul works for a well-known large company. He's elite. With your ordinary looks and below-average everything, Janet, you are as different as night and day. Thus, with similar expressions, both my husband and mother-in-law were triumphant. I had heard my mother-in-law bragging about her son more than enough since getting married. I was even forced to sit straight and listen for more than an hour at a time. Just the other day, the president personally praised him. His promotion is guaranteed. That's my Paul. A woman like Candace is suitable for him. So please never appear before us again. It's refreshing to cut ties with a failure. Of course. I also don't want to see you again. But it's really sad. You don't understand anything at all. Unable to contain it, I burst out laughing. My mother-in-law, husband, and Candace all gaped at me. Hey, Janet, what do you mean? What do you mean by saying we don't understand anything? I won't allow you to insult not just me but also my mother. I'm not insulting you. I just feel pity. Mother-in-law and you're good at finding faults in others but blind to essential things. Right, Candace? As I turned my gaze to Candace, she averted her eyes. Seeing this, both my husband and mother-in-law looked perplexed. Here, I hit the core of the issue. Paul, you can't remarry easily, you know? Because she already has a husband. Silence enveloped the room. My husband was the first to burst out laughing. Come on, what are you starting with now? Such a fabricated story? Honestly, I'm disappointed. It's pointless to expect anything from your brain. Exactly. It's foolish to make up such obvious lies when you've impulsively divorced. And now have no way back. Seizing the moment, perhaps to ride on the momentum. Candace wrapped her arms around my husband's and pressed her body close to his. The sensation of her soft skin made his nostrils twitch visibly. It was utterly disgusting. Your wife is just jealous because she is infertile. Please don't bully her too much. Then she said to me. It's sad for someone who couldn't be blessed with a baby. And was abandoned by the person you loved most. You are the pitiful one. Candace is really the best. She's just great. Unlike the infertile failure Janet, she has a big heart. Yes, Janet is a pitiful person. She wanted children but couldn't have any, and her future looks bleak. Saying she moved to a nearby place, but it's probably a shabby apartment. Well, it suits you, Janet. The three of them teamed up and threw snide remarks at me one after another. Like they were playing a coordinated game. Well, I had anticipated this, so there was no need to panic. I just needed to make my next move calmly. It's easy to say anything about a poor infertile woman, isn't it? But everyone, can you say the same after seeing this? What is this? I handed a piece of paper to Candace, who slowly began to read it. Right after that, her face drained of color so quickly you could almost hear it. What's wrong, Candace? You froze all of a sudden. What's written on this piece of paper, what? My husband, who checked the content next, turned just as pale. Realizing something was terribly wrong, my mother-in-law snatched the paper from Candace. This can't be true, can it? It says here that Paul is infertile? I'm sorry to say, Mother, but it's true. The reason Paul and I couldn't have children was not because of me, but because of him. When I started infertility treatments, I asked him to cooperate as well. It's something that makes sense only when both partners participate. However, he blamed the infertility on me and left all the treatment to me. So, I managed to please him enough to at least get a sample from him. And immediately went to submit it. The results are as you see. I waved another piece of paper in my hand while explaining. It was my test result, indicating that there was no problem. What must they be feeling now? They pitted me for being infertile, when in reality, it was my husband who was infertile. Their positions must be quite uncomfortable now. As I looked at them sternly, my husband suddenly spoke up. Why didn't you say anything until now? If you knew, you should have told me immediately. This is why you're a failure. Could you not lash out just because you're shocked? I wanted to tell you when it was just the two of us. But you never listened to me. Right after the infertility test results came out, you started staying late at work more and started ignoring my calls and emails. How was I supposed to tell someone who's hardly ever home? Wait, did you know about Paul and Candace's affair from the beginning? My mother-in-law asked with a horrified face, so I smiled kindly at her. Yes, I already knew. When he started staying away from home so blatantly, anyone would suspect an affair. Once I started suspecting, I had to investigate thoroughly, right? So I looked into both Paul and Candace. My mother-in-law collapsed weakly to the floor. My husband stood motionless, staring at me like a statue. I clapped my hands sharply with a smile on my face. Now, here's a question. It has been revealed that Paul is infertile. But Candace is pregnant. Whose child could it possibly be? The answer must be clear to both my husband and mother-in-law by now. Just as I said earlier, actually, Candace is already married. This means she has been deceiving Paul and my mother-in-law. The air was charged with tension, creating an eerie atmosphere. My husband and mother-in-law silently looked towards Candace. Their eyes, which had been gleaming triumphantly just before, were now dull and lost their shine. A bead of sweat trickled down her forehead. Her lips, tightly pressed together, trembled slightly. And she nervously tapped her elbow while crossing her arms. Yet, as expected, a woman capable of having an affair is different. Her brain must be wired differently from ordinary people. Candace managed to lift the corners of her mouth as much as possible. There's no proof. We never know whether the test results are true or not. You could have fabricated these test results, couldn't you? My husband and mother-in-law turned to me with startled faces. Do they still have the energy to fight back? Such a waste of energy on this parent and child. Candace straightened her back and puffed out her chest, boldly facing me. The core of your claim that I'm married is based on that piece of paper, which states that Paul is infertile, right? It wasn't directly told by a doctor, and it could be considered a forgery, couldn't it? If his infertility is denied, then the child in my belly is genuinely mine and Paul's. You'll have to take responsibility for slandering me by calling me a married woman. I thought if witches existed, they would laugh like her. Smiling unnaturally with teeth bared and eyes narrowed like a crescent moon. Candace must have deceived and trapped people before. But there's nothing to fear. The one who needs to take responsibility is Candace. Oh, you really are pitiful. You could have just admitted it and apologized. Here, Candace, I'll give this to you as a gift. Make sure to accept it properly. Here, I pulled out a card-shaped paper and placed it in her palm face down. She looked puzzled but flipped the paper over. And her complexion changed the moment she saw the text written on it. Her body began to tremble violently, and sweat poured down her face. Noticing her odd behavior, my husband couldn't help but speak up. Candace, what's wrong? Is that a business card? Responding to his concerned voice, she silently handed over the card. It read a Gail Robert. Then, my husband collapsed in shock. Like Candace, he trembled as he stared at the business card. Wait, what's going on with both of you? What's so special about that business card? Not understanding the significance of the name yet, my mother-in-law almost snatched the business card from my husband's hand. Let's see. Harrison Corporation's CEO's Gail Robert. Wait, isn't that where you work? What's the relationship between the president of that company and Candace? Tell me, Janet. Say it. Mother, you already know, yet you ask me to say it? You really want to escape from reality, don't you? Well, I'll wake you up then. Gail Robert is Candace's husband's name. This time, my mother-in-law forcefully fell to the floor. She too began to tremble violently all over. No, this can't be true. Having an affair with the president's wife of the company you work for. Paul, did you really not know anything? How could I know? I didn't even know Candace was married. Wait, you mean I slept with the president's wife? That's really bad. While the two of them were more agitated than ever, Candace, still staring at me, bit her lower lip. She must have been told by my husband that I was a woman who couldn't do anything. Her condescending attitude made it obvious. Thus, I had been in contact with President Gale, Candace's husband. Knowing that I had outsmarted them must have deeply frustrated them. How did you find out about my husband? Well, it's because. Just as I was about to answer, my mother-in-law suddenly stood up and grabbed me by the collar. I was taken aback by her aggressive approach. Janet. I'll pay you compensation if you want. I'll do anything, even apologize thousands of times, so just keep this between us. Let's pretend this never happened. That's the best solution. I was beyond angry. I was astounded by her desperate attitude. After calling me a failure time and again, now she wants to pretend it never happened? As if life works that conveniently. People end up in these situations because they think only of themselves and belittle others. Even if we pretend this incident never happened, similar issues will likely arise again. Without change from my husband or mother-in-law, any quick fix is meaningless. It's too late for anything, Mother. President Gale knows everything. Why do I know that Candace's husband is President Gale? Because he came to me first. He had already figured out the affair between Paul and Candace. What? You mean President Gale reached out to you, not the other way around? Everything's out in the open? As I quietly nodded, she collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. President Gale had sensed the signs of Candace's affair and started an investigation. It seems he was more thorough than I was. It seems that President Gale is preparing to divorce Candace. Well, isn't that convenient? Now Paul can remarry her. Wait. It's true that Robert Gale is my husband, but the baby is Paul's. Even now, Candace was trying to cover up her lies. She always did play her role well. Despite her makeup running from all the cold sweat. I cut off her words and blocked her last escape route. It's President Gale's child, right? There's no mistake. It has been confirmed with the help of President Gale. How? I don't remember anything. Didn't President Gale ask you to have your blood drawn? Well, he did say it might be good to check my health or something. She looked bewildered. The glamorous image she had when she first entered our home had completely vanished. And she seemed to have aged a decade in just moments. Nowadays, it's common to use a pregnant woman's blood and a man's epithelial cells. A swab from the mouth can do. With these, prenatal paternity testing is possible. No way, you had all that prepared? Eventually, Candace sat down exhausted. Her neatly styled hair had become a mess due to the excitement. Everyone seemed to finally understand the situation in their own dazed ways. I placed my hands on my hips and exhaled with satisfaction. Then, my husband started muttering something. I couldn't hear the words, but his expression didn't seem positive. I tensed up again, ready for a confrontation, when he suddenly looked up and shouted. This is ridiculous. After all the sweet nothings you whispered to me, it was all lies? What were you thinking, having an affair with someone from your spouse's company? You unreasonable woman. He was shouting not at me, but at Candace. A new vitality returned to her eyes, which had been listless. Didn't you know? Every beautiful rose has its thorns. Just because you had a taste doesn't mean you should take it seriously. You are really silly. She retorted sharply. Paul's frown deepened. Oh, are you angry? You have such unnecessarily high pride. That's why you're easy to handle. You never think that you're just being played, moving exactly as told, just like a pet. What did you say? Who do you think you're talking to? Candace finally stood up and moved close to Paul. Her gaze intense enough that he stepped back slightly. Listen, the reason our affair was discovered is because you were a failure. Who are you talking to? I am the wife of a president. You have no right to complain, even if you're being played. Paul took a few steps back and gave a dry smile. I see, that's your true nature. I understand now. He walked past Candace to stand in front of me and suddenly took my hand. Janet, I've come to my senses. It's been a roundabout journey, but I've finally found true love. You're the only one for me. Incredibly, his lips swiftly moved towards mine. Instinctively feeling terrified, I narrowly dodged his kiss. I kicked him in the groin without hesitation and retreated to a corner of the room. My back was instantly drenched in sweat. Paul was moaning but still calling my name. My mother-in-law, for some reason sparked by the words true love, was vigorously defending Paul. Pushing for our reconciliation. Paul, it's great that you've come to realize your true feelings. Just a little more persuasion for Janet. There's no man as elite and wonderful as you. I just want this to end. Ignoring my husband, I turned to my mother-in-law, who was still giving her son adoring looks. Mother, both of you said earlier, right? A woman who can't bear children is useless. I don't think so at all, but Paul is useless, is it correct? The sparkle in her eyes vanished in an instant. Her gaze awkwardly dropped as she hunched her shoulders and shrank. That should stop her from dreaming too much. As for my husband, he was completely frozen like a statue. Being called useless must have been a first for him. He's always been clever, always praised by adults around him. But that's not enough. It's about how and where you apply those clever skills. It seems my husband lacked moral integrity from the start. I looked at him one last time, ensuring I kept a safe distance. You were cursing Candace for deceiving you. But you don't have the right to complain since you deceived me as well. What goes around comes around. Paul's eyes regained sanity under my icy gaze. Still clutching his sore groin, he reached out desperately, but I did not take his hand. It was all too late now. Do you now understand how it feels to be called useless? When I smiled at him broadly, he finally stumbled forward and apologized. I'm sorry, Janet. It was all my fault. Can you forgive me just this once? I'll show you that I can change. They say cheating is a sickness, right? It's not something that can be cured easily. Why would I, now a stranger to you, patiently deal with that illness? With those words, I finally left my in-laws' house. Without looking back once. Afterward, Paul was sued for damages by both me and his boss. And he was also fired from his company for reasons of moral turpitude. Even so, for a while, his pride as an elite seemed to protect him. And he continued to behave as if nothing had changed at home. However, he couldn't handle household chores at all, and without me, who always maintained a disciplined lifestyle, his life quickly became slovenly. He was constantly fighting with his mother, who had been so close to him. Since the president had spread the word about Paul's misconduct within the industry, his job hunting did not go well. His debt didn't decrease but instead continued to grow, and eventually, He became so desperate that he reached out to me for help again. Of course, I rejected him outright. Paul is now living only to repay his debts, juggling low-paying part-time jobs. I heard that the president did not overly blame Candace during her pregnancy, not wanting to stress her due to the unborn child. Therefore, Candace, deluded by this considerate treatment, believed she was forgiven. She lived the life of a wealthy president's wife as if nothing had happened. But only until she gave birth. Soon after the child was born, the president took the baby and left it to his parents. Then demanded a divorce from Candace. As soon as her postpartum recovery was sufficient, she was to be kicked out of the house. And hysterical crying could often be heard from the house at night. Meanwhile, I managed to find a new job and began a carefree single life. A life without anyone attacking me unilaterally was truly stress-free. As I lived nurturing myself, I remarried a few years later to someone I met through work. The following year, I fulfilled my long-held desire to have my own child. Holding the tiny life in my hands was more lovely than I could have imagined. And I vowed to dedicate everything to making this child happy.